Today I am going to talk to you about the aims of community research. After I finish my lecture, you will be in a position to better understand the questions or concerns of community psychology. You will also be able to identify values and social context of community research, recognize the role of participation and collaboration in research, and also understand the different ecological levels of analysis. Let me give you an introduction. Community psychology follows an action research tradition to infer how ecological contexts impact individuals and how individuals shape ecological contexts. Action research is an outlook to inquiry rather than a specific kind of method. It is a method for intentional learning from experience. Action research is an outlook to inquiry rather than a specific kind of method. It is a method for intentional learning from experience. This was originally formulated by social psychologist Kurt Lewin. This method consists of intervention in real world systems followed by close analysis of the effects for understanding or development of theories. Its aim is to improve practice, and it is typically conducted by a combined team of practitioners and researchers. While it remains grounded in experience, it employs a participative process. Community psychologists rely on empirical answers, systematic observation, and measurement. Action of all individuals are based in research findings, and research is used to understand the impact of those actions. Community research aims to provide useful knowledge for decision making, planning, and action at multiple levels, from local action and community change efforts to state, national, and even international policy making. John Glidewell made a marked departure from much mid 20th century research in psychology, which was laboratory based, to community based research, and he surprised his colleagues. He worked on evaluating school-based prevention programs which provided useful knowledge for action at multiple levels. Usually, most research was conducted in university classrooms and designated lab spaces. Community psychologists pursuing research find that to enhance the knowledge gained, they must share control with community members. Now, a good community research design, along with a collaborative equation with the community, can produce insights not available in the laboratory. In a collaborative relationship, both community members and researchers plan and implement research. Moving on to the concerns for conducting community inquiry. Research can either provide support or harm the persons in the communities. So, values are involved at every step of that research. Along with action, central to its identity is community psychology's commitment to the value of research. All community psychologists are engaged in some form of inquiry as researchers or even as practitioners. Further, each community research project must resolve larger questions about the relative priority of several other values. These values are citizen participation and collaboration, social justice, respect for human diversity, and searching for community strengths. These issues can be summarized as: who will produce what knowledge, for whom, and for what causes. Important overreaching concerns or questions for community psychology research can be summarized in terms of the following four divisions. Number one, values and assumptions in community research. Number two, promoting community participation and collaboration in research. Number three, understanding cultural and social contexts of research. And number four, selection of ecological levels of analysis for the research. Moving on to the values and assumptions in community research. Community psychology researchers need to be very clear on their fundamental values and their assumptions about research and its relation to community and social action, though these ideas may change over time and with interaction with the community. There are three philosophies of science for community psychology research. One's belief about scientific knowledge is through what methods it is obtained and how it is related to action, and this is called the philosophy of science. In psychology, positivism has been dominant. A few of its common elements important in psychology are pursuit of value-free neutrality and objectivity in research, an ultimate goal of understanding cause and effect relationship by hypothesis testing while controlling extraneous factors. Positivist science seeks to construct generalized laws based on research findings which are applicable to many circumstances. Now, this vision is critiqued as no observer is value free. That is, one is always a member of some kind of culture or is influenced by it. Moreover, the particular qualities of culture, historical circumstances, and settings limit the generalizability of research findings from one context to another. These and other critiques have led to post-positivist thinking. Let's talk about problem definition in research, taking a stand on social issues. Community researchers must decide how their research will relate to action. A post-positivist approach to social problems seeks pragmatic and generalizable answers supported by research. It applies the scientific methods and findings of psychology to society in terms often defined by policymakers and funders. Like much of social science research, this stance dominated the early development of community psychology. Community research can identify roots of problems, develop programs or social policies to address those and gauge their effectiveness. However, social consensus around problem definitions and solutions often does not exist. Even with public health problems that are clearly defined and for which causal factors are understood, there is often great controversy about prevention methods. Other examples include debates about sexuality, child and family problems, and drug use. Hence, social problems are better termed as social conflicts. An important role of community researchers is to identify a community whose views are being overlooked and to conduct research that helps bring attention to the experiences and views of persons in that community. This provides broader knowledge of the issues and may also identify community strengths and resources. This approach can be termed as attending to the unheard voices. Attending to unheard voices involves beginning research from the standpoint of the less powerful individuals within social systems, the people who are most affected by the practices of social systems, but who have the least control over these practices. That knowledge can be used to advocate for social change, to improve their lives and perhaps the quality of life for the whole community or society. Let's now talk about promoting community participation and collaboration in research. We'll begin with researcher-community relationship. One metaphor for the researcher-community relationship is that of the guest and the host. Research is conducted by guests in a host community. Such guests are expected to provide full disclosure of their intent and methods seeking permission for their activities, respect for host wishes and views, and meaningful thanks for hospitality. Researchers receive the gift of cooperation by the community in providing data. Reciprocating that gift involves providing products of that research in the form which is useful to the community. Now, another metaphor for this relationship is collaborative partnership, with both parties having some degree of choice and control, and with open communications, compromise, and respect regarding these choices. Each partner brings unique resources to the shared work. Participatory community research is not a noble sacrifice by researchers. It involves rewards and costs for researchers and community members. Both imply long-term interest, but the partnership metaphor especially involves participation by community members in planning and in conducting research. These control-related issues become even more important if the research involves an intervention or action program. The problem to be addressed, the specific objectives of the intervention, and how it is implemented and evaluated are all issues to be decided. Long-term commitment by researchers is needed if the intervention is to be incorporated into the everyday life of the setting. Next, I am going to talk about participation and collaboration. The resources of researchers and the host community must be assessed. From researchers, these may include funding for programs or staff positions for community members. To build true collaboration, both sides will need to devote time and effort and decide how to share control. Not every community needs or wants the same resources from researchers. An economically oppressed community may look for economic resources, while in a more affluent community, the need may be for emotional support and respect for persons with chronic illnesses. Now, community members also offer resources such as practical knowledge of the community and the culture, social networks, and access to community settings. Interdependence of researchers and citizens must be built through interpersonal relationships. That involves informal face-to-face contact, getting to know each other without barriers of expertise and titles, commitments for a longer period of time than a traditional research or intervention project might assume. Next, I will talk about research designs. One option for making research designs is to create a community research panel comprised of representatives of community organizations and other citizens, which allows researchers to communicate and negotiate with community members. It also improves the ability of researchers to understand the cultural characteristics of the community and provides a way for the community to hold researchers accountable. Now, instead of creating a new panel, researchers can establish a formal relationship with the existing body in the community. For example, it could be a tribal council or it could be a panchayat. Another model for research decision making is to include community stakeholders as part of the research team itself. In both models, a community research panel working with professional researchers as well as a research team comprised of university community partners, research is planned collaboratively. Moving on to research products and impact. Research involves producing scholarly reports such as journals, articles, books, conference presentations and the like that promote the careers of researchers themselves but are not of much value to the society. Various questions surround research and its products concerning its benefits, presentations to the community in a useful manner, gain of knowledge or resources through the research, future collaborations or funding. Concerns of the macro system raise wider issues of social justice, portrayal of cultures and communities, influence on decisions of groups or individuals, or inform the views of policymakers at different levels. Let me tell you about the limitations of participatory approaches. Participatory methods are time consuming and risky for the citizens, who often must master new roles that can be empowering but also take time, effort, and skill development. The extent of that commitment should be chosen by the citizens with the support and respect of other members of the research team. Participation by some citizens in research decisions opens them to criticisms by other community members who are displeased by the methods or the findings. The research team may need to navigate these situations very carefully. Although participatory method levels to some extent the hierarchical, unequal relationship between researchers and community members, some power differentials seem inherent in conducting research. Now, using the participatory methods does not magically erase these differentials, which must be acknowledged and dealt with. Now, here we have to understand the cultural and social contexts of research. Understanding diverse cultures, populations, and settings is essential for community psychology, as all research includes laboratory study, occurs within a culture or cultures. It is important for community researchers to understand how they themselves are affected by cultures, as well as study a variety of cultures and communities, especially those that have been ignored by mainstream psychology. There are 4 methodological issues involving culture. Cultural assumptions significantly influence every research decision. However, psychologists have only recently considered how these assumptions limit the meaning and interpretation of research findings. Recently, cultural variables were included in many studies without adequate reflection about the meaning of these constructs, why they may be important for a given study, and how they may be measured or assessed. Now, how is cultural or ethnic identity assessed? These and similar concepts are often assessed with simple box checking based on the participants' self-reported choice among a limited set of categories. Assumptions of population homogeneity. It's a related issue and concerns accurately understanding the diversity within every culture. An assumption of population homogeneity categorizes all members of a cultural group as alike and overlooks differences among them. Next is the assumptions of methodological equivalence. It's a third issue which concerns the equivalence of research methods across cultures. Such assumptions can occur even when cultural differences are not the topic of research or even recognized by the researchers. Now I'm going to tell you about the between group and within group designs. A between group design compares 2 or more cultural groups. Its strength is that such a comparison can yield knowledge of differences between cultures. One major drawback is that the researcher's own culture will affect their design, assessment, and interpretation of differences. Also, the equivalence of procedures, setting, and measurements in both cultures is very difficult to assure. Finally, without a deep understanding of both the cultures, it is difficult to avoid interpreting differences as a deficit or weakness in one of the cultural groups. Thus, between group studies are vulnerable to producing results that blame cultures for problems rather than considering cultural strengths and effects of such external forces as economic or political forces. Researchers use the within group design study as a cultural group in more depth on its own terms. Comparisons and differences between cultures are not the focus. Researchers using a within group design study a cultural group in more depth on its own terms. Comparisons and differences between cultures are not the focus. This approach fosters understanding of why distinctive cultural practices exist. Moving on to conducting culturally anchored research. What can researchers do to recognize issues of culture and respond to them? The first steps begin with oneself. Cultivate an understanding of how your own culture and experiences have shaped your own worldview. In addition, adopt a sense of informed naivety, curiosity, and humility in learning about another culture, and awareness of your own limited knowledge and a genuine willingness to learn. Next, we are going to talk about selection of ecological levels of analysis for the research. The challenge for a community psychologist is addressing the interrelationship between these differing levels of analysis, not just studying one level in isolation. For example, in a study of protective factors for adolescent resistance to drug use, variables across multiple levels should be considered. These may include individual needs and strengths, such as microsystem factors as family and peer influences, neighborhood characteristics, cultural values and resources, economic factors, and political influences on drug laws and enforcement. Let me summarize what I have taught you today. Communities are useful settings for research. 4 major concerns are values and assumptions, promoting community participation and collaboration in research decisions, understanding the cultural and social context of this research, and ecological levels of analysis. There are 3 philosophies of science which underlie much of community psychology research. Post-positivist views seek to minimize bias with measurement and experimentation, as they assume that no researcher is truly neutral. Constructivist views emphasize a connection between researcher and the participant, the particular setting where research occurs, and the understanding that participants' experiences and their meaning to participants, not just causes and effects. Critical views emphasize how social forces and belief systems influence researchers and participants, and researcher responsibility for integrating research with social action. Each philosophy has its own advantages and disadvantages. A positivist approach defines social problems and seeks to test solutions with scientific research. Participatory, collaborative community research processes include developing a community research panel in one way to involve citizens in these decisions. Community members can also become part of research team. It is important to understand the cultural and social context of a community. 4 research issues involving culture are: number 1, how culture and ethnic identity are assessed. Number 2, challenging assumptions of population homogeneity, that everyone is similar within a cultural group. Number 3, methodological equivalence of research methods and measures across cultures. And number 4, whether it is more valuable to study differences between cultural groups or study one cultural group in detail, which is the between group and within groups study. Community research has multiple ecological levels of analysis. Thinking in terms of level of analysis helps in understanding society and community context for well-being and social support networks. The 4 questions for community research are interrelated, not sequential. So researchers must make clear choices about each.